What is going on, everybody? I'm AJ, and I'm going to give you guys the breakdown for UFC Fight Night Gastelum versus Whittaker. We're going to go in the order of Tapology from bottom to top. There's a couple different sources that are conflicting the bout order. Tapology, I would like to think, is the most reliable one, and it's, of course, subject to change. Some of these other sources that I go to look at maybe are going to update them throughout the week. I know Tapology is very prompt with their replacements, how they update the bout order, things like that, injuries. So that's the bout order that we're going to go into for that very reason. So without further ado, let's just get into the first fight of the night, which takes place at 155 pounds. Austin Hubbard takes on short notice UFC newcomer Dakota Bush. I just got done taping this fight. I think Hubbard's the rightful favorite. I just think he's favored based on the fact that he is much more UFC experienced. He's fought a few more times in the UFC. He's just much more professionally experienced in general, much more prepared, facing on a newcomer who I always say with like newcomers and a lot of other sharp people pointed out, we just don't know how good they are just based on not being able to gauge their level of competition, just coming from different promotions and whatnot. So it's tough to tell exactly how good they are against UFC level opposition. And Dakota, some things I like about him, he trains with TJ Brown. He also trains with Bryce Mitchell, obviously two UFC fighters. He also, from what I could gather, is a striker. He has gone for takedowns some in one of his most recent fights, particularly his second most recent one in LFA. He went for a double leg takedown against the fence. He was reckless when closing distance, but I appreciated his willingness to go for the takedown, get the double leg against the fence, pick up the opposition, slam him down, looked past the guard, and the opposition gave up the back, and he got the rear naked choke. That at least shows me that the guy is improving process to his game. That's something that I really value in fighters. And while it's all fine and good, I think that he's not near the grappler as Davi Ramos, Marco Madsen, Joe Selecki, Max Roskamp. These are the type of grapplers that Hubbard has been faced with. Bush, like I said, he's capable there, but he's just not nearly as credentialed as these guys, Davi Ramos and Joe Selecki, elite level black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Marco Madsen, an Olympic level wrestler, Max Roskamp, also very credentialed in wrestling and grappling. And even in those fights, Hubbard held his own, right? I mean, he was able to get up from a lot of the takedowns of Madsen, get his way back to the feet, and almost knock Madsen out in round 3. So it's not as if, I don't think Hubbard's a straight up bad defensive grappler. I think you need to be a good offensive grappler to really impose yourself on him. And even then, he could still give you a little bit of trouble, but by just being so tough and have good cardio for 15 minutes, he trains at Denver, Colorado altitude, and he could fight a hard 15 minutes. We saw Roshkov slow down on against him, and he was able to kind of tee off and get the finish there. So the prediction I'll make is Hubbard. He's not my most confident pick on the card. He doesn't do a good job moving his head off the center line. Like I said, he can be taken down. He's not like a truly polished mixed martial artist. We've seen holes in his game, again, particularly referring to the grappling. Not the most technical striker. We saw him knocked down, rocked by Davi Ramos. So I wouldn't put it past Bush to do something like that. He seems to excel as a striker. He's got solid combos. He moves well. He could go a hard 15 minutes. He does have some knockouts on his resume. I don't think he has a lot of power in his hands, but he throws a high kick, which just naturally is more damage inflicting if, say, you don't have a ton of power in your hands. The head kick, especially if it's placed nicely, could definitely do some fight ending damage there. So the pick is Austin Hubbard. He's not a lock. I just think that most likely he wins this fight. Moving on up, we've got a fight at 115 pounds in women's strawweights. Jessica Penne and Lupita Godinez. Godinez making her UFC debut, and Penne is making her UFC return after a very, very long layoff here. There's a massive age gap between these two. Godinez is actually 11 years younger, has been much more active than Penne, as you could guess, based on that statistic that I pointed out. And I'm very impressed with Godinez. At this point, just like Bush, she's still very green. She's only 5-0, so the tape only tells me so much. I mean, I'm impressed with the tape, but at the same time, the level of competition is not UFC level competition. And that's not to say that I don't think she'll win this fight or that she won't go far. I think she can. But what I'm trying to say, why I'm saying that, is because that sort of information I think is crucial for me to say, place a bet on her in the future, to have more conviction on the type of fighter she is, how she fares well in a UFC octagon, because it's one thing to look great on the regional scene, but it's a whole nother ball game to look great in the UFC. It's UFC's thought of as the top promotion, right? You're seeing the top level fighters in the world. There's obviously other great fighters in other promotions, but that is the reputation that the UFC has, right? Appreciate you, John. Thank you, brother. And so, yeah, going back to this fight, though, I am very impressed with Lupita. I saw some other people on Twitter point out the same thing. I mean, her boxing looks phenomenal. Fast hands, she has power. I know that her resume doesn't say that she has a lot of TKO KO wins, but she does throw with power in her hands. The technique is beautiful. She fights at a decent pace. Her footwork is good. She's a good athlete. She's fast. She has trained in the past with Rose Namajunas. I'm very impressed with this woman's boxing. Apparently, she also has a wrestling background. She has wrestling experience per the commentary team of her most recent fight against Vanessa Demopoulos. And Jessica Penne, in addition to me being concerned about, just the layoff, she's now 38. I become more and more of a statistics guy recently. They just kind of grown on me. Like, I always think that statistics help paint a picture as to how a fight goes. Like, it's not, I don't treat it as like the end all be all in a matchup, but it's just more relevant information that I could use in my analysis. And one thing that I found with Penne, and granted this was a while ago, but in a decent sample size, absorbed 4.73 significant strikes per minute with a 48% striking defense. And a lot of that came against Yelena Jędrzejczyk and Jessica Andrade, two phenomenal talents, aggressive strikers. But it goes along with the point, help painting the picture of the fact that Penne could do a much better job of moving her head off the center line. She'll kind of run into range and throw a right hand or a kick and not really set it up. She doesn't gauge range or control range, rather, exactly well. But there are things about Penne that are definitely very good. I mean, she has a reach advantage here, about 4 inches of reach. She could strike out of both stances. She utilizes the jab, side kick, body kick, left hook, right hand, decent combinations. She's also a brown belt in judo. She's also a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. She has hard knees in the clinch, which I like. Like I said, Godinez is mostly an unknown at this point just because she is so very inexperienced and because this is her UFC debut. I don't think she's an elite defensive wrestler. She was taken down by Demopoulos in round 4 from a double leg, and her guard was passed. Demopoulos passed from full guard to half. She did a decent job of stuffing most of those takedowns, and for this matchup, we might just not see the best version of Penne. So she might, her wrestling might not even get tested as is, considering the circumstances. But it is something I'd like to see addressed. It's enough of a reason for me to not bet Godinez at the line. I do think she wins, though. I just think her hands are much faster. She's much more technical of a boxer. I would, despite me admiring her boxing, I would like to see her mix in more kicks. I always think it's a good thing to have more variety as a striker, because when you do, you just give your opponent more things to think about. I mean, headhunting is great. We see a lot of fighters have a tremendous amount of success just headhunting, Peter Yan, for instance. But I think that it helps fighters in general, varying the attack, throwing kicks, not just working the head, but working the body, working the legs. They score points, right? So that's something that I'd like to see improve out of Godinez. I think as she gains more experience, we can see that those wrinkles added to her game. As time goes on, just her experience, I just think it'll make her a better fighter as is. She's very young in her career. So I'm optimistic about Godinez's career. I think she gets her hand raised here. Do I want to bet her at the line? No. But as far as a prediction goes, I think most likely Godinez goes out here and gets a win. I'm going to say by decision, just because she's mainly a decision fighter. But this is one of these spots I would not be shocked to see her get a stoppage. I mean, she does have pop. I'm impressed with her boxing, and as we discussed, Penne is very hittable on the feet per the statistics and per the eye test as well. Next fight. Women's 135, Zara Farn taking on Josane Nunez. Farn actually dropping down from 145 pounds to 135. You might know her because she had fought Felicia Spencer and Megan Anderson as her first two UFC fights that did not go her way. In those fights, we learned that her defensive grappling is a huge liability. She was taken down in both fights. from the body lock. Her guard was passed. Spencer was able to pass the guard into mount, land a bunch of ground and pound, which forced the stoppage. Anderson was able to mount her. Farn actually briefly reversed Anderson, but then Anderson off of her back was able to submit her with a triangle choke. So that is definitely an area of weakness in Farn's game. She seems to excel as a striker, but I don't think her striking is elite. It's pretty robotic and raw, I would say. She does have a few inches of reach here, 5 inches of reach, which is definitely a plus. I mean, the reach advantage does help you in the striking exchanges generally. And Josane, I've watched some tape on her. She trains at Astra Fight Team, so she's training with women like Tyler Santos, who myself and others are very high on, a very talented fighter in the 125-pound weight class. And she's not the most technical striker either, but she does throw with power and she is aggressive, and that might help her win the aggregate of the striking exchanges, despite the reach disadvantage. I mean, Farn just doesn't do a great job of controlling range. She gives up the clinch often. So if Nunez wants to be aggressive in close distance, I think she can. And from there, she could do damage or look to take the fight to the ground. I don't think either is a great grappler. I've seen Nunez put on her back, get controlled, that sort of thing. But I think she's a better grappler than Farn. She's shown me, even though she doesn't have any submission wins on her resume, she's shown me more submission grappling than I've seen out of Farn. I mean, Nunez will threaten off her back, aggressive, I'd say, with the submissions. But she's content to play guard, content to be on her back. And one thing that I always point out with sort of these guard players, and I even remind myself about it, when considering a bet, is if they're on their back and they throw up all these submission attempts, if they don't get the submission attempts, they're losing minutes, most likely. Unless if they're like, say, aggressively attacking the top control player with elbows and they're doing more damage than the top control player. But if it's like, if the damage is mostly in favor of the top control player, and the bottom player is mostly just trying to throw up submissions and they're unsuccessful, the top control grappler usually wins that scenario. And so that's my concern with Nunez, just kind of in general, maybe not in this matchup, but against an opponent where she's the inferior wrestler, so like she's just kind of stuck on her back and she can't find the sub. But yeah, she's shown me more submission grappling, much more than Farn has. I mean, the UFC debut combined with the Spencer fight, they were just two very concerning sequences. And again, like I said, I don't think she's a great striker either, despite the reach. So she does have it going for her that she's been in the UFC. She's been in the UFC twice, albeit both fights were brief. But she has the experience, and I do think experience goes a long way. But despite me thinking this is close to a 50-50 fight, I'm going to side with the more aggressive fighter, the fighter that I think is more capable on the mats in Josane Nunez to get her UFC debut victory. Vic is in here. What's up, Vic? Let's go, AJ. Glad I'm finally able to catch this live. Yeah, man. I'm happy to have you. Thank you for joining. And let's do this, man. Yeah. So next fight. I'm looking forward to this one. Tony Gravely and Anthony Burchack taking place at 135 pounds. I think Gravely, the rightful favorite here. If you guys have listening to me by now, I never use that word lock or guarantee. I think that most likely Gravely wins this fight. Burchack, I mean, let's just look at that last fight he had against Gustavo Lopez, right? He, long-awaited UFC return. In that fight against Lopez, he was taken down easily twice by Lopez, double legs against the fence. And he was also mounted by Lopez, and he gives up his back after being taken down. And Gravely, he is a very strong wrestler. He comes from an NCAA Division I wrestling background. I don't think his MMA wrestling is that polished. Obviously, we've seen him taken down plenty of times. We saw him taken down by Brett Johns, who's a very good grappler, but also Rodriguez on the Contenders series. So he's one of these guys that he's a solid athlete. He has very good cardio, but his overall MMA wrestling isn't up to the standards as how credentialed he is outside of the octagon, if that makes sense. Like, again, NCAA Division I, you would think like his wrestling metrics would be elite. I mean, they are offensively, but defensively, he gives up takedowns. But in this matchup, I think he's a better wrestler than Burchack, and I think a much better athlete. The Lopez fight was a concern. I also think that kind of a sneaky take. I don't think it's the most likely thing. I wouldn't bet on it, but I wouldn't be shocked if Gravely just knocked him out. I don't think Gravely's a polished striker at all. He's got his issues defensively. For statistical reference, he's got a 42% striking defense. He's not a good technical striker. He was getting tagged a lot by De Freitas. He was very hittable in that fight, but Gravely has power in that left hand, and I think he's a much better athlete here. And Burchack, like, just watching film on him, I'm concerned about the guy's durability. He was dropped early by Lopez in that UFC return fight. He's very stationary and hittable, and he throws a lot of naked low kicks, which leaves him open to counters. And his striking in general is just kind of wild and sloppy, just will throw strikes out of range. So I think it's kind of like a coin flip-ish type in the striking, coin flip-ish type of fight in the striking exchanges. But I think that what will prevail Gravely here is his wrestling. I think he's a better wrestler, the better athlete here. He should be able to take the fight to the ground. Once he does, if Burchack does not fix up that tendency of giving up his back, I think that Gravely could back mount him and then just kind of ground and pound, earn a stoppage, just kind of like we saw in his Contender Series fight. I really like Gravely's pace and just his relentless wrestling. He's one of these guys that has good enough cardio to land multiple takedowns over 15 minutes. I mean, he'll slow down like he slowed down against De Freitas, but he's one of these guys that'll just kind of push through it because he's so tough. So I generally agree with Gravely being the rightful favorite here. Just more upside as a fighter, I'd say. And even though this is only his third UFC fight, he's a very experienced fighter. So love to see that out of him. He's an American top team guy, which I put stock into. You know, who you train with, I think, is important. It's not the end all be all in the matchup for whatever reason, or it's not the end all be all in a matchup, but I do think it's important. Again, he's got process. He looks to advanced position and top position. The takedowns are good. Good duck under double A, going open space, as you would expect from a good college wrestler. Ability to chain wrestle, physically strong. I think Gravely wins this fight in all likelihood. Tajik is in here. What's up, Tajik? Top analyst in the game. Keep it up, AJ. Thank you, brother. I really appreciate it, man. And thank you so much for being in here all the time. Really means a lot to me. I wish you the best, and let's kill it on this event, man. I mean, we got a big event this week. I don't have the most action on it, but, you know, any card could get me excited. I mean, I love this stuff. So, you know, 1 unit or 10 units on a card, I'm getting up for this stuff. Alexander Romanov and Juan Espino. This to me is probably the one of, if not the toughest fights for me to call on the entire card, just because they're so very similar to one another in terms of their fighting styles, and neither guy has really faced like their own respective fighting style, if that makes sense. Like, they're both very physical, big guys for heavyweight that excel as grapplers. I appreciate their game a lot. But going against each other, it's going to be tough to see who gets the upper hand, if at all. I mean, I think we could see a lot of cage pushing, clinching, just a lot of, you know, just not a whole lot going on, if that makes sense. I mean, like, again, they both are very good at what they do. Espino is a very credentialed grappler, as is Romanov. Romanov comes from a sumo background. That was a talking point going into his UFC debut, and this guy is an aggressive grappler. I like how he just looks to take the fight to the ground, pass the guard in top position, and just either throw ground and pound, or he's got some funky submissions like the forearm choke that we saw last time against De Lima. So I appreciate Romanov's game a lot. He's going to be 9 years younger than Espino here. He's been much more active than Espino. A freestyle wrestler, wrestling medalist from Moldova is Romanov. So at heavyweight, like, if you're a heavyweight with a wrestling oriented game plan, like, you could go far. I think there's just not many wrestling oriented heavyweights. I mean, there's guys that can wrestle, but it's not like they're plan A game plan. I tend to think that gives a fighter an edge if they're able to take down the vast majority of the opposition, just because not many guys can do it. And if you're a top control player, that gives you a good chance to win rounds down the stretch and even get a finish. So again, it's heavyweight. All these guys have power. Anybody could get knocked out. I get it, but it's nice to have that process in his back pocket. And then Espino, kind of the same thing. I mean, multi-medalist in grappling. He landed multiple takedowns in both the Hughes fight and his UFC debut. He's a great guard passer in top position, and his Espino, good with the submissions. He's just, my hesitancy is just like, what is he going to look like here if he's pushed? And I'm not really sold on Romanov's cardio either. He has slowed down on his regional footage. He's only been to the third round twice in his entire pro MMA career, has Romanov. He was noticeably tired in round 2 of his most recent regional fight. And he's got holes in the stand-up. I mean, they both do, but Romanov just throws big looping shots. He's just not a good technical striker. He'll just kind of like walk forward and like rush his way into close distance. We saw De Lima just tag him up on the way in. Against a fighter with better technical striking and more power, he could have been knocked out there easily. I don't know if Espino is the guy to do that, but it's a flaw in Romanov's game nonetheless. Espino, he's not a good technical striker either. He doesn't set up his takedowns either. They just both kind of recklessly close distance, and that's just not. I mean, we saw it not too long ago with like Blades and Lewis, right? I mean, Blades just kind of shot in from afar, and Lewis saw it coming and he countered him with an uppercut. I mean, that's not an outcome that I would expect 10 times out of 10 in this sort of matchup, but it's a liability in their games nonetheless. So we're left with like this fight that's kind of 50-50-ish, but why I slightly edge Romanov is because he has been more active. He's 9 years younger. And there's just a chance that he just looks better than Espino. I mean, I just trust a little Romanov a bit more. I've just seen him pushed a bit more as fights kind of go on than I have Espino. And that's not to assume Espino would look bad. I would like a little bit more clarity there. I mean, again, that fight against Hughes was Espino's first fight in almost 2 years. So stylistically, I think it's a toss-up fight, but I just mentioned why I like Romanov. Again, the age, more activity. It's not the strongest it takes that I have in the card, but I'm going to give you guys a prediction who I think is likely to win nonetheless. 125 pounds fights, women's flyweights. Tracy Cortez taking on Justine Kish. Tracy Cortez, decent sized favorite here, over 2-1. I tend to agree with her being a favorite. I think she has good enough wrestling here to get the fight to the ground. It's been a while since we've seen Kish taken down, and it's possible she's improved in the meantime, but she was taken down by Ashley Yoder in the past. I just rewatched the Felice Herrig fight earlier today. Herrig kind of just threw her down from like body locks, passed her guard multiple times, took the back multiple times, nearly submitted her. That is something that maybe Kish has improved in the meantime. But we just don't really know. She's just fought strikers in the meantime. Pudilova, Mazo took her back and got the choke, but that was after a head kick. So only so much to take away there. But it's a fight where I tend to agree with Cortez being favored because, again, I favor Kish a bit on the feet. I've never been a big fan of her striking. She comes from a Muay Thai background, but she's like very square with her stance and very hittable. She absorbed a lot of strikes against Sabina Mazo, over 130 per UFC stats. And I just don't like how her striking defense is. The head movement could be much improved. The chin is high. The hands are kept low. Like, I would not be surprised to see Tracy have some moderate success on the feet. Not saying that she would dominate the striking exchanges, but I think she could have some success. But why I agree with Tracy being the favorite is because I think she could take this fight to the ground. From what I could gather, she doesn't come from an elite level wrestling background, but she's worked closely with Henry Cejudo for years, trains at Fight Ready. She showed me enough MMA wrestling in the octagon to make me feel good about the fact that she could get Kish down and control her there. I mean, Cortez is a solid control grappler. She looks to pass the guard in top position. She utilizes the body triangle for control if she has your back. She, lands a lot of ground and pound. She's just very physically strong and aware and scrambling opportunities. She's just very, very sound in the grappling transitions as Cortez. And she's just another fighter that's very young. So I think we see her get even better than she's shown. So this is a step up for Cortez, but I do think that she passes here just based off the stylistic dynamic of she could very well land takedowns there in this matchup, and therefore she should be able to control where the fight goes. And I tend to side with that fighter. Do I want to bet her at this line? No. I think Kish will give her a good fight. Kish even showed in the Herrig fight, she's very scrappy and she's not the most technical in terms of like getting out of positions. In fact, she relies pretty much exclusively on strength and explosiveness, but she still gave Herrig some trouble nonetheless. Reversed Herrig a couple times. Kish has cardio for 15 minutes. So I definitely do think that this will be a tougher test that Cortez has faced than, say, her prior to UFC fights. But that said, I still think in all likelihood she passes this test and gets her hand raised. So my pick is going to be Tracy Cortez. To round out the prelims, we have a middleweight fight between Gerald Meerschaert, GM3, and Bartosz Fabinski, the Butcher. So full disclosure, I thought prior to tape that I was going to maybe bet Fabinski here. Not the case after watching. If you're a statistics guy, Gerald Meerschaert he historically has not shown a good takedown defense. And I think in part because he's just very comfortable like in the grappling transitions. Like he'll like almost let you mount him so he could reverse you and try and basically submit you, kind of like what we saw against Trevin Giles. Meerschaert just doesn't have a very process-oriented game. Like when his whole game plan of like him letting the opposition pass the guard and he's not able to reverse doesn't happen. We see him lose in dominant fashion, like against Jack Hermansson, for instance. I mean, Hermansson passed the guard like 8 times, 9 times maybe, just inflicted a ton of damage on Meerschaert. Like even Oscar Pehota early on, was dominating the fight up until Pehota gassed. So it's a hesitancy I've always had with Meerschaert. I think he's tough. Again, I think he is a good submission grappler, and that might be enough for him to win the matchup, but he just doesn't have the most process to his game. Fabinski, well, for starters, neither is a very polished striker. They definitely both excel as grapplers. I feel pretty confident that Fabinski can land takedowns here. Judoka, practitioner. He's shown to land takedowns in volume. For instance, 7.08 takedowns per 15 minutes landed in the UFC. That's a very high stat. That tells me that he has cardio. We have seen him slow down, like against Mech, but he'll push through it. And again, Meerschaert his takedown defense is 46%. That's really low. He almost reminds me of Louis Smolka. It's just not a process-oriented game. It just like for them to win a lot of fights, they kind of need to weather a storm. And when that doesn't really happen, it just kind of falls apart. You know what I mean? Like I feel better about fighters that like they have a more process-oriented game plan. Like if Meerschaert was one of these guys that like is only going to like settle for like offensively grappling and not, just lay on his back and let you pass his guard, I would like to see that more out of him, but he just hasn't always shown to do that. I mean, he goes for takedowns some, but he's just not the best wrestler. So the way the fight goes down to me, it breaks down to me is I think Fabinski will take Meerschaert down if he wants and maybe pass his guard, but Meerschaert might submit him from a guard. I mean, this is 2 fights in a row where we've seen Fabinski submitted. I mean, I know the Prazeres fight, he got rocked with a big overhand right. I mean, that's one thing. Prazeres just jumped on him, swarmed him, passed the guard, and just immediately submitted him. And, the Muniz fight even took Muniz down, weathered an early guard sub from Muniz, but then Muniz threw up an armbar, and he just like instantly tapped. So that's a concern that I have for Fabinski, because I could just see Meerschaert just blocking something up, and that's the fight, like right then and there. So I agree with the odds being very competitive. I slightly favor Fabinski just because, just like we talked about in the Cortez-Kish matchup, he's the wrestler. He should be able to dictate where the fight goes. And he basically should be winning this fight up until he's not. Like, he should be landing takedowns, getting top control. And Meerschaert's way of winning would be like a guard sub, or maybe he sweeps him and submits him there. But I'm going to hesitantly pick Fabinski just because I think he's the better round winner here. Let's see how it shakes out. It is one that is very high variance, I will say, after watching those last two fights. On to the main card, though. We have Andre Arlovski and Chase Sherman. Heavyweight fight, obviously. I like Arlovski in the matchup. I think he's the more technical fighter, more defensively sound. I don't think Arlovski has elite pocket defense. His hands tend to drop. Head movement can be much improved, but I think it's better than Sherman's. I mean, Sherman's head stays on the center line. I mean, he's very, very hittable in striking exchanges as Sherman. He has shown solid durability throughout his UFC career, but more recently he got knocked out cold by Shamil Abdurrahimov. We saw Walt Harris knock him out. That was earlier on. Justin Willis nearly knocked him out in round one. Sakai, and even on the regional scene, he was getting rocked badly by guys, nearly finished. So Sherman is one of these guys that is an attrition fighter. He'll pressure you. He has good cardio, and he'll just kind of stalk and land leg kicks in volume. And he could get finishes if guys crumble. They just don't have the proper footwork to circle out of the fence, get back to the center of the octagon, or fire back with more compelling counters. And Arlovski certainly has not flashed much power as of late, but I think he's a much better fighter than a lot of these guys that Sherman has been facing. The durability does concern me about Arlovski, just like in any matchup we've seen with him as of late, but it's held up well recently. The last time he was knocked out was by Rosenstruck in 2019. And then prior to that, it was Ngannou in 2017. Debatably two of the heaviest hit. Well, I think pretty clearly two of the heaviest hitters at heavyweight, right? So I'm not putting it past Sherman to knock him out, but I just don't think it's the most likely thing, considering just Arlovski is pretty content these days to just stick on the outside, land in volume, just not really engage that much in the pocket, and just kind of win on points. And I just think he's better at that than Sherman. I just am going to favor the more technical fighter with better footwork. I mean, Sherman's just very flat-footed. And I'm going to side with Arlovski. I mean, the thing that makes me hesitant is just not just the durability, but just he hasn't really pulled away in many fights. He's just been winning a lot of competitive fights where yeah, on paper, they're unanimous decisions, but for the Bozer and this fight, for example, I mean, going into the scorecards, I had no idea who the judges were going to favor there. It was a very close fight, both of them. He was outlanded by Bozer 68-34 per UFCstats.com, but why he won the fight is just kind of off optics. There's a couple moments there at the end of the couple rounds, and I put out tweet out this earlier, just how you end rounds could really make a difference in the judge's eyes, even if the other fighter is winning clear. Just leaving that last impression could really, have an impact on the round and maybe even steal it. You never know. So that's my concern with Arlovski. Even if he wins this fight, I think there's a chance that he just doesn't pull away. I mean, I still think he can, though, because, the most a recent opponent that he faced that is very hittable, just like Chase Sherman, is Ben Rothwell, where Andre Arlovski landed 152 significant strikes in 3 rounds. That's very good volume out of Arlovski. He attempted 272 per UFCstats.com. So that could happen. I think if there's a matchup for Arlovski to showcase that volume again in this weight class, it would be this matchup, because against Sherman, UFCstats.com again, 5.55 significant strikes absorbed per minute per Sherman against guys that just I don't think are as technical as Arlovski. Against the guest of Sakai, Sakai landed 111 on him. He got tired in that fight. That's another concern. I mean, that's a concern I have for both of them. They both have slowed down in their fights these days. But I'm going to side with Arlovski. Just better technical fighter, better footwork. That should help him win the aggregate of the striking exchanges. Not the most confident take that I've ever had, but he's going to be my pick nonetheless. Moving on up, we're on the main card still, of course. We have Abdulrazak Alhassan taking on Jacob Malkoun. This is another interesting one. I mean, this is just a fight where I mean, on paper, this should be a spot where Alhassan should win. He's a guy that we know is so dangerous, athletic, explosive, and he will go for the knockout early in round one. And we saw a guy, that fits that prototype, Phil Hawes, do that to Jacob Malkoun. So that is probably the most likely outcome. That is very obviously, I'm sure what everybody else is thinking, but at the same time, it could very well happen. I mean, Malkoun just kind of backed himself into defense and just didn't really know how to circle out, just succumbed to the pressure and got knocked out cold by Hawes. Like, I don't know if it was just UFC jitters, just he didn't know what to do. I mean, this is a guy that going into that fight was only 4-0, so he's still very green, very inexperienced. He's a training partner of Robert Whittaker. He has competed in grappling competition, ADCC Asia 2019 trials winner, BJJ purple belt, 2019 Pan Pacific gold medalist. Alhassan is just a much better athlete. He's also a judoka practitioner, black belt in judo. He's just, I think, a better athlete and a better wrestler is Alhassan. I think he'll be faster, hits harder, and he just has a legit chance to win this fight by knockout, right? But an interesting stat about Alhassan is he has not won a fight that has gone past the first round. It's because of his cardio. He's a guy that will go out there at you really hard in round one and get the knockout. But if he's unsuccessful after throwing all those powerful strikes, he tends to slow down. He tends to fatigue. We saw that against Omar Akhmedov. We saw that against Mounir Lazzez. I don't know if Malkoun has it in him to replicate that same sort of blueprint that those other two guys did, just kind of weather the storm, take Alhassan down, kind of ground him, put him on his back, and again, not take damage while standing. But it's possible, right? Anything is possible when you're dealing with a high variance fight where one guy is going to just try and brawl, and he's very good at what he does. But now he's coming off two losses, and one of them was by knockout. My concern with Alhassan is these past two fights, he missed weight, and these were the return fights in, since coming back from his layoff, right? And I just don't know where he's at. So this is one where, on paper, Alhassan could go out there and do his thing, but I don't think it's like this layup spot. It's not a spot I would bet on, I will say. So we'll see. I mean, I think Anaconda Bets has something to say. What's up, Dan? Alhassan, but yeah, I mean, I think that's most likely what happens, man. I think you're right. You're right on track with that. I mean, it's on paper, it should be right. It's weird. Like, I just think that Chaos Williams knockout was just so strange. I mean, Alhassan just threw a naked low kick, and then Chaos countered him with a right hand that just kind of, like, Alhassan had his hands up, but it's still the punch still got through, and then he was like out cold. It could be a conditioning thing. I don't know. It's possible. If you mix that with the fact that he's been missing weight these past couple of times, I wouldn't be shocked. So yeah, it's Alhassan probably goes out here and wins, but I just don't want to trust him as a minus 300 favorite, knowing that he's a guy that historically, if he can't get the early knockout, he tends to slow down. And he's lost all these fights where he gets extended. So it's not my cup of tea for a bet. I wish everybody the best of luck that has action on this card, this card, obviously, and then also this fight. So we'll see how it shakes out. This is Alhassan. I think this is a better spot on paper for Alhassan than his previous two matchups. So we'll see how he looks. Got another comment in here. Rex, what's up, Rex? He's fighting at middleweight this fight. Oh, good point. Good point. Let me check that out, man. Middleweight, yeah. Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. That snuck past my gaze. Yeah, that's big for him, right? Because I mean, we've seen times where a fighter moves up and they still miss weight, right? I hope that's not the case. But thank you for pointing that out regardless. But yeah, I think that could help him. there's two ways to look at that, I always think, because in theory, if you move up in weight, your power is less compelling because you're just facing bigger guys. I still think that even if Alhassan moves up to, say, light heavyweight, he still can have, compelling power, but it's an interesting angle. So yeah, we'll see. I'm still going to watch the weigh-ins, as I'm sure you guys are as well. We'll see how he looks on the scale. Hopefully he doesn't miss weight. And maybe he has a better showing here. So the pick is going to be Alhassan. Another comment here from Anaconda. I think he moving up is a good sign. Won't be. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? You could look at it two ways. You could look at the loss as maybe that discourages them. Maybe it fires them up. We don't really know unless if we know the fighters personally, which obviously I don't. But that is a very good point. It could very well fire him up and maybe, certainly, he certainly can have a much more better performance here than, say, we saw in his last two fights. So you make a very good point. So yeah, then we move on to Ricardo Ramos and Bill Algeo. So this is a fight where kind of a rare time where I'm not going to side with the more skilled fighter. I do think that Ramos is a better fighter here. I think he's a better athlete. I think he's just more technical in terms of grappling and striking, but he doesn't have good cardio. His cardio could be much improved. He doesn't fight at a high tempo either. Striking output is low. He rarely throws in combination, does Ramos. And he's coming off a loss that was interesting. I love Lerone Murphy, and it was an impressive performance, but I don't know what to make of it from the Ramos side. Because Murphy took him down from the body lock, and then he was taken out easily another time from the body lock in the same fight in round one, obviously. And then he was knocked out on the ground. It was just kind of a bizarre sequence. Was it just one of those freaky knockouts that we only see once in a blue moon, or is this the sign of something to come with Ramos? He just is a guy that, going along with the cardio point, he doesn't fight at a high pace because I think he's conscious of the fact that he can't fight a hard 15 minutes. Against Journey Newsome, a UFC newcomer debutant, he only landed 3 takedowns, didn't really pursue them, just content to fight at range. He slowed down against Kang. I mean, his cardio has never been great as Ramos. And Algeo does have very good cardio. We've seen 2 fights now where this guy has showcased toughness, resilience. He's shown to fight at a high pace as Algeo. I mean, I'm not big on Algeo's defensive tendencies. I think they could be much improved. For instance, if you're a stats guy, 38% striking defense. Takedown defense on paper is okay, 62%. But he's been taken down several times by Lamas, who's a very good grappler, obviously, but also Carlisle, very strong guy, and Laughlin. Again, these are guys that are very capable grapplers, no doubt about it. But so is Ramos, right? Ramos is a capable grappler himself. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Ramos have some success early, but I just think that the pace and the pressure of Algeo is going to be too much down the stretch for him. And that's going to tire Ramos out. And I think that most likely Algeo wins rounds 2 and 3. Cardio is something that I think is very compelling in MMA, as is durability. But as it pertains to cardio, you could be a great fighter, but if you can't fight a hard 15 minutes, your win equity goes down. If you just can't keep up with your own work rate, the opposition could just kind of take over down the stretch, get a finish. Maybe they'll win the latter half of round 2 in round 3. I was just watching Drakkar Klose versus Christos Giagos. Giagos, he won the first round. He won the first half of the second round. He took Klose's back. He threatened him with a rear naked choke. But Klose ended the round strong, and he won round 3 and ultimately the fight because he was a much fresher guy down the stretch. And I'm not saying that, for sure on paper, Giagos is a much better fighter than Klose. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, despite the early success of Giagos, he couldn't sustain it because of the cardio. So it's just very, very important, something that I look at in fights. Fighters that could fight a hard 15, 25 minutes, it's very, very impressive, ultra impressive. So, again, I wouldn't be shocked to, see Ramos win just based off the fact that he's the more skilled fighter. But I think that the toughness, the attrition, the cardio of Algeo down the stretch is going to be a bit too much for him and probably win him the fight. Luis Pena and Alex Munoz taking place at 155 pounds. This is a close fight. I mean, we've seen multiple times Pena struggle with takedown defense, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious. Everybody who's wanted to take Pena down pretty much has. He's not a straight up poor grappler. Like, he could scramble well. He's a, for instance, like in the Karma Worthy fights, Worthy was able to reverse position, get in top position. Pena was able to create a scrambling opportunity by attempting an omoplata, working back to the feet, attempting a takedown. We saw that even in the Matt Frevola fight. Matt Frevola had top position, and Pena just so big, so long, leveraging that length so well, just literally turned himself on top of Frevola for a reversal. So he's very tricky as Pena. He leverages that length very well, but the takedown defense in particular, 50% per UFC, or 45% per UFCstats.com. I was actually looking at a striking defense. The striking defense is 50%, takedown defense is 45%. Like I said, though, he does a decent job of working back to his feet. And again, I think he's just an improving fighter, right? Like, I think that despite some losses here, he trains at American Top Team. He's a young guy. He was born in 1993. I don't think he's closed the gap between him and Munoz. Munoz is, the wrestling coach of Team Alpha Male, a camp that puts a lot of emphasis on wrestling. Cody Garbrandt, Uriah Faber, Josh Emmett, all guys that train there, just to name a few. So Munoz's wrestling is legit. The thing with him, though, is I think Pena is a better striker. His striking is just more fluid, more technical. He's more willing to engage. Munoz he swings hard with an overhand, but there's just not many layers to his game. His striking, he's got some power, but he's very hittable. Head movement can be much improved. And he just kind of, as we saw in the hack press fight, he kind of falls apart if he can't get his wrestling going. And going along with that point, he's not always the most persistent with the takedown attempts. We saw that in the Contender Series fight against Nick Newell. We also saw that against Hack Pressed. And he just was very, very predictable with his takedowns. Like, every time he wanted to drop for a level change, Hack Pressed knew it and saw it and timed it with an uppercut. Like, he saw his tendencies and he just capitalized on them. And I don't think Pena is as good a striker as Hack Pressed. Hack Pressed is a stud of a prospect, and there's a chance that Munoz has improved in the meantime, but he's still a green fighter. He's only got a few professional fights under his belt. And so for him to win this fight, and he's also not like the most capable grappler in top position. He gets takedowns, but he's not the best at controlling the opposition for multiple minutes. Guys often get back up after he takes them down. He's also not the most dangerous finisher from top position. Doesn't always look to sink in the hooks if presented the back. I definitely do think that Munoz is fairly green in terms of his MMA grappling, even though he's a good takedown artist because of his high wrestling back pedigree. So that's what the fight comes down to is can Munoz take Pena down enough times to earn enough top control to win at least 2 rounds and win the fight? Or will Pena just keep the fight standing for long enough to just show he's a better striker, win rounds down the stretch, and just kind of outpoint Munoz? I lean that Pena would get a decision. He just hasn't shown to be a big power puncher. The only knockdown he had was in that UFC debut, and he just completely outgunned Smolin on the feet. So I'm going to side with Pena. I just think that he's going to inflict more damage over 15 minutes, and I just think even though he's not a polished MMA fighter in general, I think he's more polished than Munoz at this stage. Just the more experience. And Munoz he's got one way to win this fight, and that's just takedowns and top control. Whereas, again, Pena striking in open space in the clinch, maybe he creates a scrambling opportunity, gets a reversal, maybe he gets in top position. Pena's very good. Well, not very good, but he's solid in terms of positional control. He'll put in a body triangle on you if he takes your back. So it'd be an interesting situation if it were to materialize. So I'm going to side with you, Luis Pena. But like I said, Munoz has a very clear path to victory here. I understand the odds being competitive. I think it's a close fight. Next, we move on to the co-main event. We have Drakkar Klose taking on Jeremy Stephens. At 155 pounds, Tapology is not disclosing the weight class. There it is, 155 pounds. So Stevens is actually moving up in weight, 255 pounds. And after watching tape, I think Stevens is going to win. I just think he's a more technical striker. I think he's more defensively sound. Close is just very hittable in terms of just his head movement. He's willing to brawl, as we saw in the Dariush fight, but we also saw that in the Giagos fight. He was rocked briefly there as well. He's got hard calf kicks, which I like from Close, but he's mainly a guy that is a wrestler. He comes from a wrestling background, and he looks to land takedowns. He's also very tough. He has solid cardio for 15 minutes, which we touched on earlier. But Stevens is a pretty solid wrestler himself. I mean, he's not an elite wrestler. Like if you're like Frankie Edgar type in your prime, he could be taken down by a guy like that. But I just don't think Close just hasn't shown to be that sort of wrestler in the MMA octagon. He hasn't even shown to have the jiu-jitsu acumen as Frankie Edgar. Close is only a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so I think it's going to be tough for him to take down and control Stevens. So I think mainly this fight is going to be won or lost on the feet, where maybe the Cater fight, like we touched on earlier, there's two ways to look at it. Maybe it fires Stevens up, maybe it discourages him. He had some success in the early going, but it was a pretty brutal stoppage loss. He wasn't put out cold, which I liked. It was just that the nasty elbow, which rocked him, busted him open, and he just didn't defend intelligently enough for the referee's liking, and the referee waved it off. So at least he didn't get knocked out cold. He's taken a year off since about a year off since we've last seen him. So it's nice to see him take that recovery. But I watched tape, and I just like we talked about earlier, I think that Stevens is a better striker here. He's more technical. He's more defensively sound. His footwork is better. And that should help him win the aggregate of the striking exchanges. It's not the thing with Stevens, though, is just like some other fighters that we've seen recently, Mike Perry, for instance, he's just a guy that mainly wants to land the big overhand right. Like you could just tell that he's trying to go out there and just try and knock the opposition out, I think, because he's just so confident in his power. And rightfully so. The guy does have a tremendous amount of power, but he doesn't have like a consistent round winning striking method. Like he's not a guy that just sticks on the outside, will just pepper you with jabs and kicks from the outside and just try and win rounds on volume. He's just trying to, again, win by knockout. And I could just see a scenario where maybe, again, Stevens he looks like the more effective striker. He's more technical. He's landing harder. He's more defensively sound. The footwork is better. But the judges, kind of like in the Jakar Close versus Bobby Green fight, just favor the optics of Close, just being a little bit busier, looking a little bit more effective.Maybe he beats up the leg of Stevens. They both throw leg kicks, so I guess in theory either way it's possible. But I agree with the odds being relatively competitive. I'm going to side with Jeremy Stevens. We'll see how he looks at 155 again. So there's that coming event for you. And then we have the main event. We have Robert Whittaker taking on Kelvin Gastelum. Really looking forward to this fight. We have Whittaker, pretty big favorite here, minus 250 last time I checked. Yeah, a couple of sites minus 250. And I tend to think it's a close fight. I think it's a closer fight than the odds indicate. Because I think it's going to be won or lost on the feet. Well, they're both good wrestlers, solid scramblers. They both could grapple well. They're both Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. I just think that, in one, they're not always the most willing to initiate takedowns. Whittaker did a bit against Cannonier, but mostly he was striking. Mostly he's a striker. Gastelum wrestled a lot against Heinisch, landed 6 takedowns, which was nice to see. But Whittaker has historically shown elite takedown defense, very good scrambling ability. So I tend to think that it's going to be tough for either side to really dominate here with wrestling. And so we're left with a strikers battle in all likelihood. And on the feet, I think Whittaker has advantages. I think he's more varied. I think he's craftier. They both have good volume. They both could go 5 rounds. But I actually think the advantages that Kelvin has going for him are durability. He has always shown great durability. He was knocked down by Rick Story a while ago. He was knocked down a few times by Adesanya after they had a war. So that's like a concern in a nutshell. But Gastelum, post-Adesanya fight, has shown a good chin. Took a flying knee from Heinisch just fine. Seemed unfazed. Till fight. Took some hard shots. Seemed largely unfazed. I think Gastelum still got a very good chin. It's not impossible to hurt him, but I think he's got a good chin. He also, well, and on the Whittaker side, I think that Whittaker is generally durable, but I actually think that Gastelum is a more durable one of the two. Whittaker, we've seen there was the Romero fight, the second one where he was nearly stopped. He got knocked down twice by Romero. The Adesanya fight, obviously, he was nearly knocked out at the end of round 1. He obviously was knocked out in round 2. And then there was a Cannonier fight in round 3 where Cannonier just hit him with a punch, and it seemed to hurt Whittaker. And Whittaker, showing good fight IQ, got the clinch, hung on, and got the decision there. Something that I'd like to point out with that Cannonier fight that was interesting was a lot of people were high on Cannonier going into that matchup, and I understand it. I love Cannonier. But the thing, though, that we may have forgotten about was Cannonier actually broke his arm in round 1 from a blocked head kick from Whittaker. So, and it makes sense. As you saw the fight progress, Cannonier wasn't throwing a whole lot of punches with that arm, which is interesting. And so it's like it makes it seem like, oh, well, Whittaker went 3 rounds with Cannonier. He took his shots. He could take Gastelum's just fine. I mean, I think he could take Gastelum shots fine. I don't think it's a lock that, like, if Gastelum hits him clean with his very good boxing, very good combinations does Gastelum have, the feints, the footwork, it's all beautiful as he pressures you from the southpaw stance. I think Gastelum could do damage, to be honest with you. I mean, the thing about Kelvin Gastelum is I've always admired his boxing a lot. I've always admired Rob's striking as well. They're both phenomenal strikers, but Gastelum's ability to close the distance against a much longer Israel Adesanya and do a lot of damage to the middleweight champ. You could argue Gastelum gave Adesanya the most fits at middleweight. Obviously, Jan Blachowicz beat him at light heavyweight. I'm talking about middleweight. He nearly knocked Adesanya out with that head kick. The concern I have for Gastelum is, well, the fight IQ in that sequence, he went for a takedown there. He dropped levels rather than just finishing Adesanya off. But the concern that I had for Gastelum prior to the Heinisch fight was his headspace. I wasn't, like, coming off 3 consecutive losses when at one point he was fighting for the belt. I wasn't sure how he was going to respond, but I thought he responded in a good way. He put on a clear-cut win performance against Ian Heinisch, who is a fighter that he's obviously much better than on paper. Everybody pretty much knew that going in. No disrespect to Ian. He's a great fighter, but Kelvin's world-class fighter, right? And what's up, Matt? How are you doing, man? Awesome, dude. Yeah, appreciate you, brother. So with this fight, man, I just think that Gastelum hanging on, getting this opportunity to fight Rob in a headliner that very well could be next in line for the title shot against Izzy. I think that's a legitimate possibility. Obviously, we just saw Marvin Vettori go out there and do his thing. I think he can make a solid case as well. But the point I'm trying to make is that this fight is big for Gastelum, as it is for Rob. And I think that's important for Kelvin because the motivation has always been the concern that I have for him. He's a phenomenal talent. And there's a reason why, despite the fact that he could very well be fighting at welterweight, that moving up at middleweight, he still had a tremendous amount of success. He's a very skilled fighter, but it's just that headspace that I kind of wonder about. And I think that this is a great spot if Gastelum is to get motivated to his fullest abilities. This is a spot. Headliner on a fight night could very well be the number 1 contender fight to fight Adesanya next. I think this is a big opportunity for Gastelum here, as it is for Rob, right? And so I'm going to actually pick Kelvin Gastelum to win this fight. I think this fight is closer to 50-50 than the odds indicate. I actually slightly favor Kelvin because, like I said, I think that the durability and the power advantage is more compelling than Rob's superior variety and superior craftiness. It's not one of these takes where I would be shocked if Rob won. Again, I think it's close to a 50-50 fight. I'm not saying Kelvin Gastelum is going to go out here and for sure win this fight. I'm not saying Kelvin Gastelum is going to go out here and he's going to guarantee win this fight. No. I'm just saying that I like Kelvin Gastelum at the underdog price at over 2-1 because I think he has a much better chance than the odds indicate. And I'm willing to take that chance. I'm willing to take chances like this because I personally think that they're a good long-term investment. And that's totally up to you whether you agree with it or not. I don't get offended. It's business as usual. I mean, everybody is capable of making their own decisions at the end of the day, and that's what we do. So official prediction, Kelvin Gastelum to win. I think he gets the job done, and I think he extends the winning streak to 2 in what is a competitive fight on paper. And that is the card, guys. So top to bottom, we have a total of Tapology doesn't have them listed, but it's a lot. It's a lot. I'm just going to tell you it's a lot. But although it's not a card that I'm going to have a lot of bets on, I just have my bet on Gastelum as of right now. It's a good card for DraftKings, as is all these cards, right? There's just a lot of fights. Fingers crossed that they all stay intact. No cancellations, nothing like that. So I'm looking forward to it. I want to wish you the best of luck. I want to thank everybody that tuned in. Thank you so much for the support. If you like this sort of stuff, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Please feel free to hit the like button. Leave a nice comment if you do so choose. And good luck. Have a nice day.